Thank you, Deputy President. I present the report of the Economics References Committee on the influence of international digital platforms, together with an accompanying document, and I move that the Senate take note of the report.
You've moved. Do you wish the call?
Yes, please.
Give you the call.
Thank you very much, Deputy President. Well, the context for this inquiry was that the ACCC has been doing a large body of work in relation to digital platforms under this government and the last, and this is a very slow but important body of work. And so the Senate, in its wisdom, decided to establish an inquiry to look at these matters, and I thank the Senate very much for giving us the opportunity to do this important inquiry. And at the outset, I would give my thanks to Senator Walsh, the Deputy Chair, for the way that this process has been conducted, and for all the members of the Secretariat and the other senators that participated. And the basic point that comes out of this inquiry is that large tech companies are very lightly regulated in this country, and compared to a bank or a telecommunications company, they face virtually no regulatory burden. And that is a major problem, because in our society today, we have a situation that big tech companies know more about us and have more power and influence over our society than I would say any monopolist has had in history. I mean, they make the robber barons look like they are not very powerful people at all in a historical context. And of course it's difficult to try and work out what to do here, because we're talking about global companies operating across multiple jurisdictions that have huge cultural power and have been very successful at evading regulation, and of course that is part of their approach. So rather than setting out 20 or 30 unreadable recommendations, this committee has proposed just 8. And we start off with a recommendation that deals with the significant fragmentation of our approach here in this country. Now, we basically have 4 institutions: the OAIC, the ACCC, the eSafety Commissioner and ACMA, that have some jurisdiction in relation to digital platforms. And these are not organisations that are working together on the big issues of the day, certainly not in any public way. And we had to FOI the meetings of the so-called DP Reg organisation, which is a group of people from these agencies that get together to talk about issues in order to work out what actually was going on from a coordination sense. So our first recommendation is that we believe that the country would be well served by having a proper consolidation of these regulators so that they are able to deal with the multifaceted challenges that the big platforms pose. Now, this committee was not a rerun of the social media inquiry or other inquiries. It looked at competitive restraints, and it looked at where there were problems where people were being exposed to organisations that had too much power and were not sufficiently regulated in any form. And the next set of recommendations went to the bundling of products and services, and there were significant submissions that the committee received that large tech organisations would bundle payment services alongside products in order to evade competition and in order to lock down their very strong monopoly position. Because, of course, in a practical sense, if you think about this, if you control the hardware of a phone or a physical platform like an iPad, and you control the operating system and the software, and you control the apps, you have a vertical integration, I should say, which is unique. And it allows you to have a completely unfair market position, bargaining position. And so we have sought to address that issue in that recommendation of unbundling. One of the features of banks and telecommunications organisations in this country is that they do face a higher regulatory burden. One of the other processes we are undertaking in this committee is an inquiry into the corporate regulator ASIC, which has not been a strong regulator, and although the Parliament has enacted very strong laws, we have not seen large corporations face the full force of the law, and that, I think, has caused great anguish in our community. But having said that, the starting point is a sound point, that they do face a high regulatory burden. So one thing that a bank and a telco must have is mandatory dispute resolution. They must provide that as part of their service offering. Another thing which occurs in other parts of our economy is that consumers can access a small claims-like tribunal. Now, these are the most powerful and pervasive companies in the history of capitalism, and therefore we have recommended that there be mandatory dispute resolution, and we've recommended that there be a small claims-like tribunal. And I think these are very reasonable recommendations. And when we were in government, I chaired the inquiry into the Media Bargaining Code, and I well remember the threats that were made by Google and Facebook. Google was going to leave Australia and leave billions of dollars of advertising revenue on the table, and Facebook was going to turn off all these community pages. And, of course, we held the line as a parliament and we were able to win the day on that. But these big tech companies, in my estimation, will do anything to evade regulation. But I think that if we are able to tilt the scales in favour of the typical Australian by giving them access to mandatory dispute resolution and a tribunal, that would make a big difference when there is a problem with these big tech organisations. Finally, we were able to meet with Frances Haugen, who's the Facebook whistleblower, who was able to give us some very interesting information based on her insider status at Facebook. And we have recommended that there be transparency measures which apply to these companies based on a certain turnover, that they'd have to disclose the information relating to their algorithms, they would have to disclose how they target advertising and what sort of information they are collecting on people and how they are using it. And I think these are pivotal recommendations. We also recommended a right under Australian law that people should be able to delete their data. They should be able to delete their data from a digital platform if they so wish, providing that it's not creating any law enforcement issue that is foreseeable. The last recommendation we made was in relation to the utilisation of children's data, and we have recommended a special code for the collection and use of children's data, which could be, as we did with media bargaining, it could be a bill of this parliament to protect children who I believe are the most vulnerable to the size and the scope of these organisations. So, in essence, the committee has conducted a very lengthy review. It has fundamentally recommended that these organisations be regulated like they are utilities. I think this is sound, and I think that these are achievable things that we should do. And the basic principle here is that if the organisations want to do business in Australia, we shouldn't feel as if we cannot apply a reasonable standard of regulation to these organisations. They will always resist it, but it is achievable, and we have precedent here from media bargaining where that has now caused a regulatory contagion, where other jurisdictions now have similar laws to Australia in relation to media bargaining. So we should do the same as we have done on media bargaining and on e-safety, and go further to regulate these organisations like they are utilities. And if we don't do this, I believe that they will be even further out of control and even harder to rein in future. So I wanted to thank again the Secretariat and Senator Walsh in particular for the way in which this particular inquiry was conducted.